Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Posturite lunchtime webinar. My name's John Ridd, and I shall be taking the anchor role for today's talk. I'm very pleased to say that we have with us today Alan Drew, who is a company director for Travel Safety Management International. And I've actually known Alan for many years, and I know that he has a wealth of experience in this area. I seem to recall a particular occasion when we were scheduled to meet, but he'd been called off to some far-flung land to facilitate the repatriation of someone who had got injured whilst abroad, and that was in less than ideal circumstances, as I recall. But of course, international business travel isn't new. But I think we're currently in a particularly sensitive time for these sorts of activities, and managing the risks to our travelling staff has just rightly moved up the agenda. And I think that this presentation today is indeed a timely reminder of our responsibilities to our staff. But as ever, before we start, I should just do a couple of housekeeping points. For those of you who have any questions that you want to put to Alan from the substance of today's presentation, then we'll be presenting these back to him at the end of the presentation. But if you would like to type them in the box, in the panel, on what should be on the right-hand side of your screen. If you type them there, then I'll have a look at them and I will present those to him, or some of them, if we have the time, at the end of the presentation. So without taking up any more of Alan's time, let me hand over to Alan for his presentation entitled Managing International Travel. So Alan, over to you.
Right, good afternoon everybody. As John says, we've known each other for very many years, so good to talk to you again, John. In terms of just briefly my background, I started in health and safety in 1975 as an enforcement officer for the government, and I was latterly 23 years at a bank in the City of London with an international footprint, very many offices in very many countries, travelled very extensively. So I was responsible for the health, at the end, the health, the safety, the security, and the travel units merged together into a combined function. I had responsibility for medical provision, crisis management was a big part of my job, incident management, etc. So quite a lot of experience and interesting things that went on. Very conscious that we have probably a very mixed audience. I came from an institution that had very deep pockets and very big resources. Not everybody will have those. I'll try to the extent possible to try and bear that in mind in the presentation, that what a very, very large company can do, has the capacity to do, others can't, and you have to recognise that. It's also a different risk, and obviously capacity for risk and risk taking. It's very different in terms of organisations. Also, I keep an eye on, in this presentation, on how to safeguard corporate reputation when you're undertaking business or running business management for companies. It's a huge part. A company can lose its reputation very, very quickly if they mishandle an incident. There have been many instances of that. And particular focus today on staff and their dependents, because I found from experience that whenever anything serious happened in the company, the whole of the rest of the workforce looked to see how the company handled it. Because if it was them, if it was their families caught up, how would they be handled? And it was always a huge interest to our staff about how a company, responded when things went wrong. And obviously the press, the investors watch very closely how these things happen. So I wanted to quickly focus on how I see the legal considerations. What do you have to think about in terms of legal liability, criminal and civil? What are the international travel risks from my view? What is my view on travel risk assessment? Is it necessary? Where would you get advice? What about preparing for travel? My sense is that the more experienced the traveller, the more often they would begin to forget to do things they used to do. And often we found problems with inexperienced travellers, but often people who've been travelling for 30 years all of the rules and get themselves in all sorts of difficulties because they couldn't be taught, they wouldn't be told, but they would get into trouble. Peace on crisis management, continuity management, insurance and compensation. You know, how do you compensate? How do you look after staff members and families when things seriously go wrong? Do you leave it to negligence insurance? Would you rather that you had facilities in place to allow people to receive compensation without the need to sue, to challenge organisations? So, you know, the staff family member consideration is very, very important. And obviously, the question at the end of it is, do you think you have a travel safety management system, which is you know, hopefully the question that will fall out at the bottom of this. In terms of legal considerations, from the criminal law, you have to think about territorial limits. How far does criminal law apply, and how far does civil liability apply? Criminal law operates within territorial limits, whereas civil liability within the UK has a global reach. Staff members, their families can come back to the UK and sue an organisation for negligence if they cannot get appropriate compensation in the country where an incident happened. And we'll go through at the end of this slide one or two cases which I think are very, very important to to look at that differentiation of that difference. So people, of course, they worry about criminal law, and if you've got travel within your territorial borders, you've got people working all over the UK, you have to follow, you know, explicitly the UK legislation on health and safety. But really, my advice is always to follow exactly the same that same system for global travel, global operations, because you may well be challenged in the UK civil courts if things go wrong in exactly the same way. So, you know, when you ask the question, what does duty of care look like when you're building a travel management system, your system should look exactly the same as you would build a system in the UK, even if you have a global reach. You may not be able to be criminally prosecuted for operations overseas, but you could be sued in the UK courts for those things. And in terms of corporate reputation, I don't think there's much difference in the way that you see it. One of the things that is clear to me is that there aren't, for example, global acts of parliament regulations that can guide businesses about how they build a travel management system. So one of the crucial things in the organisation I worked for was the absolute critical role of benchmarking. What are others doing? Not only in the industry that I worked in, the financial sector, but what are all the other sectors doing? Benchmarking, you know, obviously those that you consider to have best practice standards. What are the best doing, and can you achieve those standards? Not every organisation has the deep pockets, has the resources to do that, but you have to look at what are the best are doing and say, can I do that? Can I get close to it? Is this going to cost me money, or is it organisation? Can I care for my people to the best extent possible within the resources that I have? And can I make sure that at the very least I'm matching the best in my industry group? Because that is how cases will look at this. What reasonable care have you taken of your people? If you're clearly unaware of the fact that the rest of your industry is doing things which you're not, you may well be found out if there's a court of law. There are, I think, three very, very interesting cases that, if you're not aware of these cases, they're good to research. Cape PLC was an asbestos mining company in South Africa, and it was one of the key cases that established the right for people to sue in the UK if you cannot get satisfactory recourse through, for example, the South African legal system. And Cape PLC guided a lot of my thinking when I worked for the organisation I did for very many years. This reach back into the UK for UK-based operation, for operations that go ahead, travel or anything else that goes ahead overseas. The two very, very interesting cases that have fairly recently gone through the civil courts were the Duzek case and Storm Harbour and KSD GMP Securities and Sundance Resources. These both involved charter aircraft accidents. Duzek was a helicopter, Caseley was a fixed-wing aircraft. Both of the aircraft crashed, both killed all on board. They had very different outcomes when the families sued in the UK civil court. And you know, if you read the judgments that were laid down after these cases, it's fascinating to see how the judges came to their decision over liability in both of the cases. When I agreed with both, but there were some factors, particularly in Caseley, that I particularly was surprised to see. But they do, you know, they should shape your thinking in terms of the things that you're thinking about. Now, in the Duzek and Caseley cases, they were both charter aircraft accidents, both killed all on board. One of the key things was whether, as a company, you should employ an aviation safety consultant to give you advice about charter aircraft. And it was very, very interesting to see both cases and how they dealt with those issues. So, you know, in terms of case law, I would particularly recommend that you look at those three cases. You can see the Duzek, the Caseley judgments. I think you can find them online, KPLC. They're fascinating cases, and I would anybody who has responsibility for travel safety management international, I would very much recommend that you read those two cases because
Alan, can I just interrupt briefly? Sorry. We're getting quite a number of people saying they're having trouble hearing. I don't know whether the microphone or if it can be.
I'll speak a little more closely to the microphone, John. Is that better?
That may help. Thanks very much. Okay, we'll give it a try. Thank you. Okay.
So, you know, in terms of legal considerations, you have to be very, very careful in terms of international travel safety management of the global reach of civil liability in the UK. Read those three cases. I would strongly recommend them to you. In terms of my experience of the risk, a lot of people worry about security very rightly, particularly this time in the world. People worry very much about security, and rightly so. There are, you know, if you think about international travel, there are very few places that you can consider that safe these days when you think about what has gone on in France and Belgium and UK and everywhere else, where there are Turkey, etc. Very, very many security issues. But must be very careful not to forget that transportation accidents are possibly the biggest cause of injury. So in other words, you worry about security. What can harm or kill your staff is transportation accidents, particularly road accidents. But road accidents and air transportation, the two biggest things. And you have to be terribly careful about the fact that people are not worried or worry too much about security to the detriment of making sure that they're making the right provision for road safety particularly. The other thing which is very difficult to get a handle on because it's medically confidential, people don't like to talk about it, is health considerations. They're probably of equal weight to security and transportation concerns, but as a business it's very hard to get the data because people won't tell you confidential medical things. If they're sick, if they feel unwell overseas, that they won't come and talk about it because they don't want to, they don't feel it's necessary, they don't think about it. But actually, you know, in terms of making sure that you can do business, your people can do business, taking care of their health considerations are hugely important. We have a huge area of natural disasters, earthquakes, landslides, you know, tsunamis, etc., etc. Many, many things that cause concern. And my understanding of benchmarking amongst international organisations over the years has taught me that depending on the risk and where you're operating, if you operate for long enough, you'll probably find that that security, transportation, health, and natural disasters. I'm not saying that you can equalise the numbers, but they're going to be strong numbers in each of those sectors. So the question about travel risk assessment is an interesting question. Do you need a travel risk assessment when your staff travel overseas? Do you need an assessment every time they travel? At the start of their travel, if they're going to travel, you know, somebody goes to New York every month, that's the only trip they do. Do they need one travel risk assessment? Do they need a travel risk assessment before? And where would you find guidance that would help you to to shape that. I have seen that there's been a growing sort of conversation from various providers about the need for travel risk assessment. Some, I think, for commercial reasons, will say you need travel risk assessment every time you travel. No question about it. It's not a discussion point. You have to bear in mind, is that really necessary? One of the key questions is generic versus individual, or both. Do you need to start with to have a generic travel risk assessment for your traveling group of people? And from that would feed the necessity for, say, individual travel risk assessment, or do you need both? What is a suitable and sufficient travel risk assessment? Who should complete it? I have to say that the conversations that we're having in my business, the previous organisation I worked for, it was very, very much going towards having individual travel risk assessments more often than not for individual travel. Where would you get good, I think, independent guidance from this? I would recommend that you look at the IOSH publication, Safety Without Borders. It's a publication produced by Institution of Occupational Safety and Health. You can see it online. If you Google it, you'll find the latest document, which is May 2015. Having spoken to IOSH, I know that they have another review of the document. I don't think it's ready yet, but I've spoken to the people that are reviewing it. And it is a document that has been out something like 9 years, and it has grown in its complexity as interest in the area has grown. One of the areas I think it falls short on is being entirely clear about the difference between generic and individual risk assessment and when you need it. But I would very, very much recommend you read this, because there's no question within IOSH that they recommend a generic risk assessment for travellers. What should fall out of a generic risk assessment is there will be a need for individual risk assessments when it's necessary. And it may well be for your particular business. It will be for security reasons, or for transportation reasons, or health reasons, or it could be chartering aircraft, or it could be a variety of reasons. But I would very, very much recommend that you read that publication about travel risk assessment and within the Safety Without Borders document, because certainly if you go back to the Duzek and the Kesley cases, they make very much play of the risk assessment or lack of it that preceded the travel of the two individuals involved in the travel. And the judgments went into great detail about what had been done, what hadn't been done, what should have been done in terms of considerations. And as I say, I've read very many publications. There are good publications, but when you think about best practice and benchmarking against a standard, certainly IOSH, it is a good publication. I think it could be clearer, and I very much hope that the new version that I think is due out possibly next year will be much, much clearer about the need for travel risk assessment and where and when that should take place. Because I think everybody is looking for clear guidance. In the lack of obviously a criminal legal framework of what is expected to be good best practice for managing travel risk overseas. But I came from an organisation that had a generic risk assessment for the best part of 20 years. Individual travel risk assessments, particularly security assessment, was conducted for every piece of travel internationally, and many parts of transportation risk. So it is it's an important thing to make a decision on. When you're thinking about preparing for travel, therefore, in that travel risk assessment, as I've indicated, transport risk is a major risk, and looking at that as a major part of it. The transport and accommodation, how are people travelling, where are they staying? Two big things. The role of the travel agent and the implant. Now, if you're working for an organisation that has a travel agent, you can use the travel agent as a hub for producing the risk assessments or raising the issues of people travelling. Electronic systems through travel agents can say, right, okay, an individual is about to travel. That information goes to the security department. It might go to the company doctor. It will go obviously to the line manager. You can use the travel booking as a conduit to all sorts of information that needs to be gleaned for that piece of travel, both for the business and for the traveller themselves. So, you know, if somebody's going to Turkey on business, then if you have a security company that provides you with security advice, you can start pushing security information and data to that individual, both before they travel and during their travel, to their managers as well, perhaps to the crisis management team if it's higher risk, so that people are aware of what is going on with a piece of travel, what the risk is, and particularly if something is happening during it. New technologies like travel tracking, I have to say, are an exploding industry. There is capability, as many of you will know, I'm sure, to use electronic travel tracking systems, so satellite, GPS systems, things downloaded onto your phone, so that companies do, under the bounds of agreed confidentiality, have the ability to track travellers when they're travelling overseas. The traveller can call in to an emergency centre if they need advice. You can fix limits on where people can travel within a country. So if they're travelling to a high-risk country that's bordering something that's extreme risk, you may not want your traveller to go anywhere near the border line. So you can, what they call geo-fence your travellers. So if they do stray into areas that you don't want them to be in, the alert would come up within the security company, make a phone call and say, hi, see you're travelling, you know, you don't seem to be following your itinerary, please tell us what's going on. Hugely important, very, very useful things now. The company I work for put in place very, very considerable confidentiality clauses within the tracking system, so that they were used for safety and they weren't used for tracking people in terms of managers and compliance and what are people doing, but hugely important. We were, my previous company, looking at health considerations, sending that same travel data to the doctors so that they could give advice. Things like communications and contact, hugely, hugely important. You know, today you can provide people with satellite telephones, GPS. They really can't go missing in the world, and those things can be important depending on where they're going. What staff at my previous organisation really, really did appreciate were the messages and warnings that could be sent out when they were travelling. There are very many companies that produce travel alerts for people that are travelling. So a bomb has gone off in a city centre where you've got travellers. What do you want your people to do? Do they know about it? What should they do? What should they do if they need advice? Strangely, perhaps not so strangely, it became quite a competition amongst competing organisations about who would get the message out first. And many of our staff were extremely upset if a rival organisation's staff were getting safety information given to them and they weren't getting it. So it is a growing industry, very, very important. Gave a lot of reassurance to people when they were travelling that they were being watched over. And in these times of insecurity, I have to say, it kept people travelling and kept people feeling secure, which is a huge part about managing people when they're travelling overseas. Training, you'd have to decide classroom or e-learning or both. I think there is a strong place for both. You know, when you've got people travelling overseas, often travelling on their own, they need to be trained before they go. Classroom training is great. If you've got a global institution, it may not be possible or appropriate. E-learning is a great medium for passing essential security safety messages. It can be complemented by classroom training. You know, you can't teach first aid with classroom training with e-learning very well. But you know, so I think there is a place for both. But certainly e-learning is a very strong message. It can be accessed globally. It's a great learning mechanism for simple safety security messages. And then obviously things like corporate security or embassy support. If you're an organisation that has big resources, a lot of staff, you may have a corporate security team, you may have very good contacts with third-party security providers. If you're a very small organisation, if you're an individual travelling, you have to look very carefully at the embassy support. What are the Foreign Commonwealth Office saying? Can you log on to the embassies? Embassies today, if you register with them will send emails out in the same way as security companies to say something's happened, or they know you're in the country and you can ask for support, or often you can be sent messages. So don't discount the embassies today. They really do provide a very good service to very many companies that need them. The other thing at the preparation stage is crisis management. Knowing as an organisation where your people are at any time so that you can give them information is one of those vital and growing needs. Most organisations today, big organisations, their senior managers, their chief executives, their presidents, etc. If something happens in the world, the first question they'll be asking is, do we have any people there? Do you know they're safe? Do we have anything to worry about? And if it takes you hours or days to do that, it looks not very impressive, particularly if the press or your investors are asking questions, or others, family members are asking questions, and you don't know the answer. So I have to say, in terms of travel tracking, knowing people where they are in the world is a hugely important piece that I wouldn't decry. So, in terms of crisis and business continuity management, key things for organisations is there a good plan? Is there a crisis team? Is there an incident response plan? Is everybody included as stakeholders in this crisis management planning? Is it sort of carved off to a small unit that doesn't really have the authority, the touch of senior management? Because when things seriously go wrong, people at the very highest level ask questions, and they need to be involved in the planning process, in the decision-making process, etc., in my view. And one of the key things is not to find out during an incident that things like medical evacuation, security response, disaster management contractors are either not in place or not good enough, don't know the business. When you're benchmarking, when you're choosing response contractors, when you're finding out whether they do things that you want them to do, it's hugely important that you ask the questions about what exactly will your medical evacuation provider do? Who will make the decision? Is it made by the medical evacuation provider, perhaps by the insurance company? Is it made by the company? Are you having an input into the control? These are good questions that you should be asking yourself about your providers, not when an incident has happened, because as I've had from personal experience, you can get into serious difficulties if what you think is going to happen actually isn't going to happen, and then having to answer the senior managers things that you believed that they believed were in place actually are not working properly, not working at all. It's not a good time to find out. The other thing that I would very, very strongly recommend, as somebody who's done it for very many years, is having the right staff in the incident response teams with huge decision-making authority. You cannot call a committee meeting and have a discussion if you have something serious going on in the world. You've got to have the right staff, fully authorised, fully funded, to make immediate, possibly costly decisions. It's quite a thing for a business, because it goes against every kind of management control that you can think of to actually say, right, I'm giving you authority to spend £5 million without asking, without requesting, to fix this. Actually, that's what the company want you to do, but they find it very difficult to let go of the normal management controls. It's something that if it's not in place, again, it can be a disaster to find out afterwards that there were huge delays because you couldn't get a decision about spending money on a medical evacuation that might cost £200,000. So it's something, again, that if you've not experienced something very serious overseas, asking those questions is very, very important. And I turn to insurance compensation considerations, policy and compensation when things go wrong. Now, this is hugely important to the staff members, particularly to their families. If your policy is we will pay if we're found to be negligent and our insurers will pick it up, that may be okay, but I don't particularly think that's the best system. It brings staff members and their employers into conflict. There are other ways of doing this that might take that conflict out. At the end of the day, when the staff member is injured, something serious goes wrong, they're normally looking for compensation. If the family member killed in an incident, the dependents left behind are looking for money at the end of the day. It's a financial issue. So, making sure you have your policy right on compensation compensation when things go wrong? What are you going to pay and when and how when things go wrong? Are very, very good questions to ask, preferably before the incident, not afterwards. Whether you self-fund or you insure, you have a captive or you have a mix, understanding how things go wrong and what you'll pay and when is very, very important. And I would, if you've not done this, I would very much recommend that within your industry group or your benchmark to the widest possible audience that you can, find out what the best do when things go wrong, because they've probably learned some painful lessons along the way about how to do this, what to pay to make sure that people are adequately compensated, and then go back and look at your own organisation and how it compensates and what it pays, and see how it works. So do you have these 5 things? Do you have good medical working capacity insurance in place? Do you have good accident insurance, pension arrangements, life insurance, salary arrangements? What about funeral arrangements when things seriously go wrong? Again, if you have the very best of the industry, in other words, you're going to pay probably more than a court would award in a negligence case, then you're avoiding the need for a family having to sue in order to get a payment, which at its bluntest end is what it is all about. So, having a look at insurance compensation considerations, do you have all of the things that need to be in place? How do you access that money? Are things negligence-driven or what I call event-driven? It's happened, therefore you pay, rather than somebody has to be found negligent. Huge discussion about the rights and wrongs, and every company will have a different view of that. But having worked in an organisation that very much wanted to make sure that staff were properly compensated, I can see the benefits of that. And having looked at companies where they don't have that, there's a huge difference. In terms of staff and their trust in the organisation and their capacity and willingness to travel, trusting the organisation will prepare them for travel, will look after them when things go seriously wrong in terms of crisis management, and will compensate them properly at the end of it. It is one of the key things that makes people want to carry on working for a company, take risk, bring the business into the business. Hugely important. So I talked about crisis management and the business, but the family, there are hugely important things that need to be looked at in terms of family considerations and staff considerations. If you're managing staff travelling overseas, if you have a multinational workforce where you may have 20%, 30%, 50%, 70%, 80% of people who don't see UK as their home country, if you have an incident, you can have a very, very complex issue to deal with. In UK, if you're dealing with a German national, an Australian national, American national, a Brazilian national, how do you deal with the family considerations when things go wrong? And so having helped to build systems, having an employee assistance program where people can talk confidentially to companies about things that concern them, stress, etc., things of concern, a good EAP is an excellent start. A family focal point team, it is, and there have been some very painful lessons learned from companies around the world who've got this stuff wrong and learned the lessons. When something serious goes wrong in a business and people are killed, the family need to find somebody that they can talk to. And the very best companies have set up things like family focal point, family liaison officer. There's a number of words and names for it. But if a family can talk to one representative within the business and have all of their questions answered for them, it is an extremely good system. Having run it for very many years and seen it operating in very many companies, family focal point team is a hugely important team of people. They have to be specially selected, trained, etc., kept up to date. So they may not have the answer to the question, they can find it out and go back to that person as the focal point for the family dealing with the business and with their family's consideration. Whether somebody's seriously hurt or killed in an incident, people want that. And having looked at the lessons learned from incidents, often families have said we had nobody to talk to, we didn't know where to turn. They find it hugely beneficial to know that they have one person. Normally that person will have a backup, a buddy, but they have one person to talk to, and they get all the questions through them, all the answers come back, and it's an excellent system. And I would very, very strongly recommend that you that you have that, whether it's insured, whether it's agreed family support. Family support systems, when things go wrong, are hugely important. So I would say, having had a lot of experience of building a team like this and seeing them operate, be surprised how even a fairly simple accident, a non-UK national falls off their bicycle, is seriously injured in a hospital in London. You have their family members coming from another country who have no idea how the UK national health system, the private system works, what the company's medical insurance arrangements are. It can be a nightmare. Putting a team in place or an individual that will care for that family it's a hugely beneficial thing for the organisation, for the family, and it is very, very much appreciated. So, in terms of the travel management piece, you work your way through risk assessment, preparation, crisis management, etc. But the family considerations and what payments are made, when they're made, are hugely important parts of the travel safety management system. Obviously, in my view. So in summary, you'd have to, my opinion, you'd look very much at your systems and say, do we have a comprehensive travel safety management system in place? Will it effectively manage the corporate risk? Remember, there are very, very different players in this, from the corporate, organisation point of view, from the line managers involved, through to, the people who are travelling, and the family members affected, and how your corporate investors look at this. Is it effectively managing the corporate risk? Will it support staff and families? I always say you never hear about the best companies because they deal with these things very, very effectively without anybody ever hearing. And actually, that's quite difficult to find in terms of benchmarking. But if you take some of the biggest organisations within your sector, go and talk to them, you probably find they have learnt an awful lot about things that have happened. They've probably got great systems in place because they need them in order to support the staff and their families and their businesses. And it's all part of maintaining the corporate reputation and the business in order to allow it to do its business. And obviously key to all this is maintaining the appetite for travel and risk-taking amongst staff. It's absolutely crucial that if people are going to travel for the business, that you maintain that appetite. Because at the end of the day, people have come to your organisation to travel. They want to do it. They're keen to do it. They do not want the business to put them off travelling, something that they want to do. And for a lot of corporate managers, it is part and parcel of the job to maintain that appetite for travel, for risk-taking, to make sure that people trust the organisation, knowing that they're doing their best. And there is nothing better in terms of business than making sure that when you're asking people to travel into risk areas, that they feel safe, they feel secure, that their families know that they're being well looked after. And it's a huge part of this whole travel management system. And ultimately, obviously, safeguarding the corporate reputation, which is a huge part of investor confidence. You can see, and many people listening to this will know that corporations have lost their reputations instantly because of the way they've handled incidents. And a lot of it is born out of trying to defend the institution, often against the indefensible. If a mistake has been made, it's best not to air it in public or try to deflect blame, etc. It is not a great way to obviously handle an incident if things have gone wrong. And so part and parcel of building the travel management system is you would hopefully not have those things happen. If they do, you obviously have a system that can deal with it where staff members trust they can come to the organisation and be properly dealt with without having to have recourse to the courts, without having to have recourse to other pressure mechanisms to get things happening, which is obviously in terms of the business a disaster because everybody else is looking at how this plays out and thinking, well, if this was me, this is how this would happen. And it has a very pervasive effect on people's willingness and ability to do business. So, organisation do you have a travel safety management system? And I think I will leave it there, John. I've left my details at the end of it. If people want to talk to me, email me. I have a small website. And I'm going to hand back now to John for any questions.
Okay, Alan, well, thank you very much for that. I think it was incredibly instructive and enlightening. Although I do have to say that we have had a number of people saying that they had trouble hearing. So my apologies to those people that did have difficulty with that. It is my understanding that the recording should be clear. Certainly my reception was fine during that. But as I say, my apologies, but you will be able to listen to the recording on the Posturite webinar website next week when it's put there. And I think, given the time, Alan, in that we get shut down shortly from this system, we'll probably take the questions offline and get you to give us some answers which we can put up on the website with these. And the questions, as they always do, come in at towards the end of the presentation. I'm getting quite a few here now, but if I can, Alan, if you don't mind too much, I'll ask you to answer those offline, unless there's anything you've particularly thought of that you didn't say that you now want to. But we've got your information there on the screen now, and I do urge people, if they want to contact Alan privately, then please do use that. There have been some questions about liability under the Health and Safety at Work Act. Alan, is there anything you can say about, I know nothing about this, about PAS 3001 and it's 2016? I don't know whether you've got anything to say about that, or where that falls, and it may be an unfair question to just throw at you at the end because it has no context.
I have to research it to get the context of the question, John.
Yeah. The questions are coming in quite quickly now, so I'm afraid, because of our time slot on this system, I will have to call an end to that at the moment. But I guess you'll be happy to answer those questions online?
Yeah,
offline,
I'll be very happy to take the questions online. If people send them through, then I'll be happy to, to the extent possible. If I can't answer a question, then I'll say so. But to the extent possible, I'll answer.
Okay. No, well, thank you very much for. I mean, if I can just take this opportunity to thank you again for that presentation, which I found incredibly informative. Things have moved on since I used to do international travel. That's clear. Okay, so thank you, Alan, and thank you everyone who did attend. Quite a number of you, it looks like. And if you can, please join us in November. I think it's November the 25th for our next webinar on dyslexia and text help, to be presented by Alistair Campbell. So all that really remains for me to do is to wish you a very good afternoon, and thank you everybody for listening.